Frank Matthews was not just a dealer. He moved like a boss with a blueprint, quiet when he needed to be, loud when it counted. One minute he is stacking power and building connections across cities. The next minute, he is sitting at tables where the old gatekeepers do not want him breathing. The streets felt his name, rivals felt his reach. And somewhere in the middle, the law finally realized they were not chasing a local hustle, they were chasing a machine. Then it all hits a strange turning point. A case, a clock, a man who looks way too calm for the heat he is facing. And after that, the story turns into something colder than violence. It turns into a mystery. But how did he build it that big, that fast, and what actually happened when the walls finally closed in? On the New York street scene, Frank Matthews was not seen like a regular headline. He was not just another name tossed around with Frank Lucas, Nicky Barnes, or Bumpy Johnson. The people around him felt something different. He moved like a man built for business, not just beef. He was described as unusually dynamic, entrepreneurial, and hungry for more than quick money. His full name shows up as Frank Larry Matthews. He was born in Durham, North Carolina in 1944 on February 13th. Early on, folks called him Pee-wee, and that nickname stayed on him. He stood out because he was thinking about structure and power before most people even knew what those words meant. Even when he was young, people remembered him as charismatic and purpose-driven. It was like he already had a plan in his pocket. And the crazy part is where that plan started. It started in a poor neighborhood during segregation. It started in a place where nothing was handed to him. That is where his mindset got forged. And once that mindset clicks on, the next move is always bigger, even if the world is telling you to stay small. Frank's early life was rough from the jump. His father was not in the picture. His mother died when he was only 4 years old. After that, he got raised by his aunt, Marzella Steele. She was married to a lieutenant in the Durham Police Department. That detail matters because it put Frank close to authority and rules, even while he was living without comfort. He went to school for a short time. People even said he was a decent student, but he dropped out in the 7th grade. After that, he did not move like a kid chasing grades. He moved like a kid chasing a way out. The streets around him were not offering many clean paths. Trouble was everywhere, and the pressure was real. Frank did not just drift into that life. He leaned into it. And the way people described him, he was not a follower. He was the type to lead. That is important because it shows the pattern early. He was already trying to be the one calling plays. And once someone like that finds a hustle that works, they do not keep it small for long. As a teenager, Frank ran a gang that stole chickens from local farms. Then he resold them. It sounds small, but it shows the seed of his later game. He was already learning how to take something from one place, move it, and flip it into money. That is the same pattern he would later use on a much bigger level. Back then it was chickens. Later it would be product. And once you see that pattern early, you can feel where the road is headed. But one chicken run turned into something heavier. During one of these stealing events, an angry farmer confronted him. The situation escalated fast. Frank hit the farmer in the head with a brick. That was not a harmless kid moment anymore. That was assault. That was a real heat. One swing like that changes how the world looks at you. It also changes how you look at the world, because once you cross that line, going back to normal gets harder. And if you are already hungry for money, the next step is usually darker. Frank had trouble early. An arrest at age 14 for assault and battery. Then came the chicken farmer incident, followed by a stretch in reform school. Another arrest in October 1960. He served time for theft and assault at the Raleigh State Reformatory for Boys. He did about a year in juvenile detention, with another detail saying 13 months in reformatory school. Either way, the point is the same. He came out sharpened. He used his time inside well. He was not sitting around feeling sorry for himself. He was learning, stacking tools, and prepping for the next level. Inside the reformatory, Frank learned the barber trade. That was not just a random detail. That trade became part of his early cover. It became part of how he built trust. It became part of how he stayed in the mix without being the loudest guy on the block. People who knew him from barber school said he talked big even back then. He was always talking about leaving Durham. He talked about going to New York. He talked about making his fortune. He talked about making a name. So when he got out, he did not settle back into Durham life. He moved, and he did not move randomly. He moved toward places where the money was heavier and the connections were deeper. That is how the next chapter starts. Not with a fresh start, but with a bigger arena waiting for him. After he got released, Frank moved to Philadelphia. In North Philly, he got into the numbers game. That was basically an illegal lottery that ran through poor and working class neighborhoods. This was before state lotteries were common. The system was simple on the surface. People picked 3 digits, like a modern pick 3. Bets could be as little as 1 penny. Sometimes people even played on loan shark credit if the numbers writer allowed it. It looked like a small hustle, but it was steady money. The odds were brutal. The odds of winning were 999 to 1 but the payout was only 600 to 1. So unless somebody hit a rare big win, the house made money every day. The winning number was tied to an outside source so people could verify it. In much of the Northeast, the number came from the last 3 digits of the handle at a major horse track. The handle was the total amount of money bet. It got printed in the next day's newspaper. On paper, it looked fair, but the game was often corrupt and manipulated by local crime families. That was the environment Frank learned in, a world where fair was a costume and control was the real prize. And once he learned control, he started thinking about how to own more of the board. Working numbers in Philadelphia did more than pay bills. It gave Frank practical experience. It also gave him access to real organized crime circles. While he was writing numbers, he started building connections that mattered. He made contacts that became future Philadelphia drug connections. Names connected to that world included Major Coxon and members of the Philly Black Mafia. That matters because it shows he was not just a corner runner. He was getting close to crews with structure. He was learning how real networks work. He was also learning that money loves order. Chaos makes cash messy, but structure makes cash predictable. That is the type of lesson that changes how you hustle. It makes you stop thinking about today's score and start thinking about tomorrow's pipeline. But every pipeline draws attention, and police pressure always comes around, especially when a young guy is moving too sharp. In 1963, Frank caught another arrest. Instead of taking a conviction, he avoided it by making a deal with the prosecutor. The deal required him to leave Philadelphia. That is not just a slap on the wrist. That is the city telling you that you are a problem they want removed. A lot of people would take that as a warning and slow down. Frank did not slow down. He treated it like a redirect. He left and he headed toward New York City. That move makes sense for someone chasing the top. New York was where the action was. It was where the bigger contacts were. So he did not move like a man running away. He moved like a man stepping up to a higher level. And once he touched New York, he was not trying to be a visitor. He was trying to become a name that could not be ignored. Frank moved into Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn. He leaned into the barber identity for real. He opened a barber shop. But the shop was not just about haircuts. It became a front for illegal gambling through the neighborhood numbers pool. That was slick. A barber chair gives you a reason to talk to everyone. It gives you a reason to listen. It gives you a reason to build trust. It also lets you stay plugged in without looking like you are plotting. He returned to the numbers business in New York the same way he did in Philly. Over time, his shop became one of the best places in town for collecting numbers. As his popularity grew, he moved up. He went from numbers writer to collector. Then he leveled up again. He became an enforcer. And that step is where reputation gets made for real. Because in that world, people do not respect smiles. They respect results. As an enforcer, Frank made sure people who played on credit paid what they owed. That is how you build a name, not by talking tough, but by making sure the money comes back. He also worked as a loan shark. That kind of role keeps people tied to you. Debt makes people predictable. It keeps them in your orbit. It makes them answer your calls. By this point, Frank was not just cutting hair. He was building leverage. He was building fear. He was building loyalty. He was building a machine. But even with all that, he started seeing the ceiling. The numbers game was steady, but it was limited. It was a neighborhood hustle. Frank was not trying to be a neighborhood legend forever. He wanted scale. He wanted reach. He wanted real power. And in that era, power in the street economy meant one thing: product. The moment he understood that, the next chapter was already loading. The world around him was changing fast in the 1960s. The civil rights movement was shaking the country. The Vietnam War was raging. Youth culture was shifting hard. Hippies were normalizing recreational drug use. Middle-class youth were experimenting with new pharmaceuticals and marijuana. More advanced dropouts were messing with cocaine, even though the cost tied it to upper-middle-class circles. LSD was described as opening the floodgates in that era. It was made available in unlimited quantities in clandestine labs. Certain public intellectuals gave a show of moral cover for drug use, but heroin stayed a different kind of drug. It stayed in large part tied to the underclass. Demand in the Northeast was serious. In New York, heroin use increased tenfold during the 1960s. Mix that with high unemployment, especially among African Americans, and you get an environment where a lot of black men ended up selling heroin to make ends meet. Frank was watching all of this in real time, and when a man like Frank sees a bigger stream of cash, he does not just stare at it. He steps into it. In 1965, Frank grew tired of the numbers game. He decided to jump into the heroin trade to make more money. This was not some random pivot. It was a business decision. Numbers taught him cash handling. It taught him customer control. It taught him street networks. But it did not give him the upward mobility he wanted. The real money was in drugs, but there was a problem. In the mid-1960s, wholesale heroin was controlled almost exclusively by Cosa Nostra, the Italian mafia. The system was tied to what was called the French Connection. That meant if you wanted to be big, you usually had to buy from them or work under them. Most people accepted that order. Frank did not. His pride and ambition collided with the gatekeepers. He did not want crumbs. He did not want a small role. He wanted to build something that was his. So he tried to go straight to the source, like a man trying to buy the whole plug, not just a bag. Frank sought meetings with the Gambino and Bonanno families. Those were two of the 5 families in New York. He tried to purchase heroin on consignment, but both groups declined. That kind of rejection was supposed to end the dream. In that era, if the mafia said no, most people stayed outside. That was the rule of the game. The mafia controlled the importing and wholesaling. They controlled who could advance past them. Frank did not accept it. He treated it like a challenge. And once you understand that, you start seeing why his story later turns into legend. Because he was not built to obey the old order. He was built to test it. And testing it meant he had to understand the pipeline better than the people guarding it. The French connection system was not just street talk. It was a whole pipeline with layers. The raw opium was tied to poppy farming in Turkey. It was refined into heroin in laboratories around Marseille, France. Corsican criminal groups played a major role in that refining and movement. Marseille was a busy port, which made shipping easier. That convenience helped move morphine base in and ship heroin out. The French connection was supplying the vast majority of heroin used in the United States at that time. Claims included numbers like 80% by 1969, and another claimed that 95% entered the US. Through that network, supply was international. It was professional. It was protected by layers of structure. Then on the ground, the New York Mafia was the channel that made distribution happen. That is why they could charge what they wanted. That is why quality could drop. People still bought it because they had no choice. The Italian door stayed closed, but Frank did not stop knocking on doors. He went to a criminal acquaintance in Harlem named Spanish Raymond Marquez. Raymond was a major numbers operator, and he had real weight in the streets. That connection helped Frank get linked to a Cuban smuggler named Rolando Gonzalez Nunez. Gonzalez was known as El Padrino. The timing hit perfect for Frank. Gonzalez had just been indicted, and he was planning to flee the United States to Venezuela. Before he dipped, Gonzalez needed a strong New York contact who could hold things down. Frank became that guy. Before Gonzalez left, he sold Frank his first kilo for around $20,000. Gonzalez also promised more supply later. That first kilo was not just a buy, it was a spark. It was Frank touching an independent supply line that did not run through mafia hands. And once Frank grabbed that, the game stopped being about finding product. It became about building a pipeline that nobody could shut off with one phone call. Gonzalez was not moving like a small-time middleman. He already had a partnership with Corsican Elements. That mattered because it meant he had an independent heroin chain that did not rely on the American mob. With that link, Frank no longer had to play the mafia's rules. He did not have to beg for consignment. He did not have to kick money up to Italian middlemen. He could move freer. He could buy, flip, expand, and keep the profits in his own circle. This is where Frank's story starts looking like an empire blueprint. He was not just buying product to eat for the week. He was securing a long-term source. On the street, that is the difference between a hustler and a boss. A hustler chases the next pack. A boss locks down the supply. And once supply gets locked down, the next step is turning one city into many. Like the whole East Coast is just one big market. That relationship did not stay small. It expanded into a lucrative trafficking network. Gonzalez regularly sent large loads of cocaine and heroin from South America. Frank also kept hunting for new sources. He was not picky about who he dealt with, as long as the product was pure enough. That focus on purity was business, not emotion. Better product builds reputation fast. Reputation brings buyers. Buyers bring more money, and more money brings more power. The old monopoly had created trash quality because customers had no choice. Frank came back with better heroin, and that gave him a fast boost. It helped him expand quickly. Within a short period, he became one of the major players in the New York drug trade. He also kept refusing to do business with Cosa Nostra as he grew. He stayed in his independent lane. That made him richer, but it also made him louder in a way he could not fully control, because when you cut out powerful people, they start watching your every move. As Frank's money grew, he did not hide it. He got wealthy, and he showed it. The lifestyle got loud. Luxury cars, flashy tailored suits, regular trips to Las Vegas. He even bought a mansion in Tot Hill, Staten Island. That area was known for mob bosses. That is the kind of detail that hits different, because some of those same people had rejected him before. He also purchased a mansion for his partner Barbara Hinton and his 3 sons on Rottenwood Road in Staten Island. This is where his hustle stops looking local and starts looking like a corporation with a boss who loves showing receipts. He was not acting like a guy hoping to survive. He was acting like a guy who believed he already won. But street success comes with a tax. The louder you shine, the more eyes you pull. And eyes are not always fans. Sometimes they are rivals. Sometimes they are cops. Sometimes they are both. By the early 1970s, Frank was overseeing a network that spread into 21 states. The footprint stretched from Massachusetts down to Alabama and west to Missouri. That was not small-time hustle. That was a wide reach that made him different from operators who stayed locked to a tight area. He had buyers and connections across the East Coast and beyond. That kind of reach was rare, and it changed how people looked at him. At that level, you are not just moving weight, you are running a system. And once you are running a system, the street starts calling you a kingpin, even if the government has not caught up yet. But Frank did not stop at being big in silence. He started making moves that looked like a takeover. And when a boss starts acting like he is building a new order, the old order starts reacting. While Frank leveled up, law enforcement did too. In the mid-1960s, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics did not control many new drug cases, so the FDA created the Bureau of Drug Abuse Control in 1965. The two agencies clashed because the same crews were moving pills and heroin, and it got so messy they even arrested each other's undercover agents. In 1968, they merged into the BNDD under the Justice Department with a bigger budget. By the early 1970s, drugs were seen as a national crisis. In 1971, Nixon called drug abuse America's public enemy #1. For Frank Matthews, the timing is brutal. By the time Frank's operation was really cooking, the craziest part was this. A lot of law enforcement still did not see him as the main problem. The idea is that if he had not been investigated, he might have built a truly national network, then pushed it international, because nobody knew what he was building, and he was not on the radar like that. He was already making millions per year. One hard number says he made about $10 million in 1972. The reasons why attention came slow are ugly and real. Some people blamed racism because cops supposedly did not believe a black man could be running something that large scale. Authorities were stuck thinking black dealers stayed in traditional roles under Italian structures. On top of that, Frank moved careful. The danger is that rivals will notice first. Frank was not some lonely bully who only knew threats. He was said to have a remarkable personality. He could get along with people. That matters because this world runs on relationships, not just fear. He moved smooth. He could talk to different types. He could make people feel like business with him was safe. But the street side never disappears. There is a line that says he was probably involved in several murders, even though he was never indicted for murder. That sits there like smoke. It suggests how these empires stay standing even when the boss wants to look clean. He could be charming and still be dangerous. That mix makes people follow. It also makes enemies take him seriously before they even understand how big his network is. And the bigger he got, the more he stepped into other people's space. That is when the street starts pushing back, not with words, but with violence. As heroin started wrecking neighborhoods, pressure came from different angles. There were communities where black Muslims were trying to keep neighborhoods clean during a heroin epidemic. That kind of presence could create conflict with dope operations. Then there were emerging black organized crime groups, especially in Philadelphia. The tension is clear, but the street is territorial. Local crews do not like outsiders acting like they own the map. A Brooklyn supplier can sell weight, but once he starts acting like he runs the city too, that is when the locals get offended. And offended crews do not write letters. They send messages the hard way. One of the most famous incidents is the Atlantic City nightclub hit, because it reads like a warning to the whole empire. Tyrone Palmer was an operative for Frank. He was also Frank's main dealer in Philadelphia. He was killed during an incident at Club Harlem in Atlantic City, New Jersey. The date is tied to Easter Sunday, 1972, April 2nd. The club was packed. The crowd was described in the range of 500 to 700 people, with one version saying 600. That is not a quiet room. That is a loud place, full of eyes. And still, the scene turned into chaos. Innocent bystanders got hit. The total casualties listed were 5 killed and 26 injured. Then comes the part that shows the fear in the air. Nobody was prosecuted because no witnesses came forward, even with hundreds of people present. That silence is not normal. That is fear. After something like that, the game stops being just business. It becomes a war of pride, territory, and survival. And once a war starts, every move after that gets heavier. In 1970, Frank Matthews was living at 130 Clarkson Avenue in Brooklyn. In that same building, an NYPD officer named Joe Kowalski was living too. Kowalski started noticing a pattern that did not match normal life. On weekends, parking around the complex was jammed up. During the week, it was not like that. The extra cars were not beaters either. They were nice rides, and a lot of them had out-of-state plates. Kowalski watched closer and saw most of the visitors walking to the same apartment. One version pins it as apartment 310. He also clocked the look. Black men pulling up in fancy cars, dressed like a Superfly blaxploitation vibe, moving like they already owned the hallway. Kowalski did not have a whole team behind him yet. He used the tools an active officer could use, like checking plates and running tags, and he did it knowing it could get him hurt, because if those guys caught him snooping and realized he was police, that could turn into real danger fast. The deeper he looked, the more that building started feeling like a hub, not a home. Kowalski did not peek once and then run his mouth. He stayed quiet and kept watching. For about 18 months, he collected small pieces and built a picture. He watched who came and went. He tracked patterns. He ran plates when he could. When he checked the tags, the names he got back were not random. The visitors were linked to major drug dealers who had cases, charges, or active investigations. And these were not just local names either. They were tied to the East Coast and even the Midwest. At first, Matthews was not pinned straight up for trafficking, but the company he kept made him look dirty because too many heavy people were coming to one door like it was a business office. After about 18 months, Kowalski took what he had and brought it to his superiors. That quiet hallway watch turned into the spark that started a formal investigation. And once a case like that goes federal, it turns into paperwork, surveillance, and a long plan to squeeze the truth out of the shadows. Even after the violence and chaos around him, the scale of Matthews' operation was not fully understood at first. The claim tied to the DEA says he controlled the cutting, packaging, and sale of heroin in every major East Coast city. By the early 1970s, the organization was handling multi-million-dollar loads across 21 states. There is also an IRS angle saying he netted tens of millions, and the figure that keeps coming back is that he made about $10 million in 1972. That is not corner money. That is boss money. That is weight moving through a chain with steps controlled, from prep work to distribution. And the wild part is how long it stayed blurry to the authorities. In 1971, Matthews hosted a meeting in Atlanta for major African American and Hispanic drug traffickers from around the country. This was not a party move. It was a sit down. The point was clear. It was about controlling international shipment of heroin and cocaine into the United States. It was about cutting out mafia middlemen. That was bold. It was not just about money. It was about the power structure of the whole game. Matthews was not trying to be a customer anymore. He was trying to be the supply boss. The DEA became aware of the meeting and monitored who showed up, which says a lot by itself. Even when it looked like the streets were moving in secret, eyes were already on the guest list. People in the room talked about building stronger independent ties with Southeast Asia, the Corsicans, and possibly the Cubans too. They also agreed to diversify into more cocaine, becoming available in massive quantities through Colombian cartels. The point of the Atlanta sit-down was bigger than one deal. It showed a shift in power. As he kept building, the pressure around him shifted. There is an account that mafia leadership grew concerned. One version claims Carlo Gambino reportedly ordered a hit on Matthews, but backed down after word got out and Matthews threatened retaliation. Whether every part of that story is confirmed everywhere, the important point is the vibe. The air changed. Matthews was challenging the old order, and the old order was not sleeping on it. Gatekeepers do not like getting bypassed, and once you look like a threat to the system starts lining up shots from different angles, including the law. After the investigation started rolling, the first major federal step is wiretapping Matthews' phones. What investigators heard shocked them. The wording is messy, but the vibe is clear. They heard talk of massive heroin business, 100,000 kilo transactions, tied to sources through Venezuela and French connection links. Matthews did not know the phones were hot. He spoke on the wire. That meant every call could turn into evidence, and every casual sentence could become a rope later. His advantage for years was staying low and building careful. A wiretap flips that advantage. Authorities discovered 2 massive drug mills in Brooklyn, and the nicknames alone tell you the mindset. One was at 925 Prospect Place, called the Ponderosa. The other was at 101 East 56th Street, called the OK Corral. These were not casual apartments where somebody had a few bags tucked in a drawer. They were heavily fortified locations, reinforced steel and concrete walls, guards posted up with automatic weapons, with mentions that machine guns were part of the protection. That kind of setup tells you the operation was thinking like a factory, not like a street. Corner, cutting, packaging, and preparing product at scale, then sending it out through lieutenants and connections. It matches the claim that Matthews controlled the cutting and packaging, not just the selling. A mill like that lets you control quality and volume, and it keeps the money steady because the supply stays consistent. But a system like that also has more moving parts, more guards, more workers, more deliveries, more chances for surveillance to catch a pattern. The bigger the machine gets, the more it shakes the ground when it moves. And when the ground starts shaking, The people watching from the outside know exactly where to aim next. Matthews is central, the one who mainly orchestrated importation from abroad, largely from Venezuela. The drugs were then diluted and packaged at a mill like the Ponderosa, and after that they were distributed through lieutenants and connections into multiple states. A lieutenant named McCargo is working mainly at the Ponderosa, cutting and bagging narcotics. Carter is an upper-level receiver who acted as a major distributor in Maryland, using a sub-cadre of couriers and connections there. In late 1970, there was a shortage of heroin in Maryland, and Carter's people met to talk about the problem. A courier named Purcell Wiley told a customer named Norman Coleman that Frank Matthews was Carter's connection. Wiley also told Coleman that if he wanted supply, he should call a New York number to reach Matthews' wife, Hinton. The idea was that Hinton would connect Wiley with one of the organization's lieutenants who would supply the heroin. Another key lieutenant named John Darby is supervising distribution in Pennsylvania. When Darby was arrested in September 1972 and sentenced on a state gun charge, his wife Thelma Darby took over his functions. That is not a random crew. That is a chain built to keep moving even when somebody gets grabbed. But every arrest tightens the pressure, and pressure is how cases go from quiet watching to full-on storms. Once the observations from Clarkson Avenue triggered a bigger response, surveillance expanded beyond one building. Authorities watched Matthews and other members moving in and out of other locations too, including 3333 Henry Hudson Parkway in the Bronx. In 1972, surveillance was greatly increased. 2 court-ordered wiretaps were obtained in June and August of that year, tied to the Henry Hudson Parkway apartment and to 7 Buttonwood Road in Todd Hill, Staten Island, described as a large residence built by Matthews and Hinton. A September 1972 search of the 130 Clarkson Avenue apartment followed, and documents were found. The documents involved money received from narcotics purchasers and showing some of the organization's spending. The legal machine was building too. The grand jury is being convened in June 1972. Barbara Hinton appeared before that grand jury on November 21, 1972. She gave some testimony, but claimed her privilege against self-incrimination on nearly everything beyond her pedigree. All of this shows one thing. The case was not a quick hit. It was a slow tightening rope. And while the rope was tightening, Matthews was still moving like the heat was just background noise, like the streets belonged to him, and the law was always a step late. As Matthews' fortunes grew, the legend grew too. He became more extravagant and more generous, and that generosity fed the myth. People said he gave money and gifts. People said women loved him. People said he was everywhere at once, popping up in Harlem, Brooklyn, Las Vegas, Atlantic City, Atlanta, and more. The physical picture is clear. About 5'8", muscular from the waist up, more normal from the waist down. People talked about his upper body build, even though there was no evidence he lifted weights. He was considered handsome and known as a ladies' man. That kind of presence matters in this world. It makes people want to be close, because proximity to power feels like safety. And when a kingpin starts moving like a celebrity, the name travels faster than the man. The name hits new cities before he even lands. That is how attention spreads in the underworld. Not with press releases, but with whispers, jealousy, and hungry eyes. And once those eyes are on you, the smallest mistake can turn into a headline or a funeral. The relationships around Matthews read like smoke trails behind a fast-moving car. He was linked to the Playboy Club in Atlanta and had bunnies. There is also the claim that he had an airline stewardess girlfriend. Another name that comes up is Sheila Fraser, described as an actress from blaxploitation films. Then there is Cheryl Brown, and she matters because she's tied to later moments. She is a younger woman from a middle-class background in Brooklyn. He met her in a bar, and she was pulled in by his charm and his money, becoming his girlfriend. In this life, the more people around you, the more risk you carry. Not always because someone is disloyal, but because every extra person is another possible leak, another shadow, another place for surveillance to catch a pattern. Matthews had heat building in the background, and he had a personal world that kept expanding at the same time. And when business pressure and personal pressure rise together, the next move is where things usually get messy. Later in 1972, Frank Matthews held another summit in Las Vegas at the Sands Hotel. The weekend was tied to the Muhammad Ali versus Jerry Quarry fight. This Vegas sit-down was one of the last big meetings before the law really started pressing in. Las Vegas was already part of Frank's routine, and not just for fun. It was business too, because Vegas was used for money laundering. He made multiple trips with suitcases full of cash, and casinos would wash the money for a fee. That fee is about 15 to 18%. That is a heavy cut, but it turns dirty cash into something that looks clean, and that is worth a lot when you're moving big money. In Vegas, Frank was not moving quiet either. He and Frank Lucas are not keeping a low profile. Fancy clothes, nightlife, gambling, cocaine. They were known to hang out with Muhammad Ali sometimes. Matthews stayed hidden longer because law enforcement was focused on another black heroin dealer, Frank Lucas. Lucas was sourcing heroin from the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia and bringing it in through caskets. He pulled a lot of attention, and later a movie about him made the name even bigger, with Denzel Washington playing him. The point in the story is not about Hollywood. The point is heat. Attention is like a flashlight, and when the beam is pointed at somebody else, it gives another player breathing room. The claim is that Matthews benefited from that, because while the spotlight hit Lucas, Matthews was secretly supplying the entire eastern seaboard. In December 1972, federal prosecutors in Brooklyn indicted Matthews. The charge was an attempt to sell 40 pounds of cocaine in Miami, Florida, between April and September 1972. That amount is a small fraction of what he had pushed since 1968, which makes the move feel tactical. The government was using a specific angle to grab him. By this point, the investigation is deep, and the federal machine is already turning. The feds want Matthews in custody so they can move him back to New York and keep him there. There is also a detail that raises the tension. The feds believed Matthews had millions stashed in safety deposit boxes in Las Vegas, and because they believed that, they wanted him held until extradition. This is why the next moment hits so hard. Frank is not caught in a street shootout or a dramatic raid on a corner. He is caught in motion, travel mode, living like the case is not real. Then the cuffs go on, and everything changes in one breath. The scene is set in the first week of January 1973. Matthews and his young girlfriend spent the holidays in Las Vegas. Then they moved like they were about to take off again. One version says they were about to board a flight to Los Angeles. Another version says he rented a car and drove to the airport with Cheryl Brown because they were headed to the Super Bowl. Then the feds stepped in. At McCarran International Airport, federal drug enforcement agents were waiting. They arrested them both. Matthews was arraigned in Las Vegas. A federal magistrate set bond at $5 million. It is described as unheard of and the biggest bond in history at that time. That kind of bond is not meant to be paid fast. It is meant to keep you sitting. He did not have time to raise $5 million while still in Las Vegas. But what really feeds the legend is how he looked through all this. His mugshot is described as carefree, like he was about to laugh. On the plane back to New York, he is nonchalant, not worried, and it unnerved officers. The vibe is that he looked like he knew something they did not. That calm hits different when a man is staring at decades. It does not feel like confidence. It feels like planning. The bail situation happens in a way that makes street sense. To make bail, you usually need a bondsman. When people raise bond money, they also have to explain where it came from. That is hard when the cash is dirty. At first, Matthews' people could not raise $5 million. His friends in Durham did not have that kind of money either. Then the situation shifts. Bail gets reduced to $2.5 million when he agrees not to fight extradition. Then once he is back in New York, it drops again. The figure is about $325,000. Investigators were furious because they believed he was a flight risk. To them, this looked like the court handing a runner the key to the door. Matthews raised the moenie and got out. He was indicted on 6 counts of tax evasion and conspiracy to distribute heroin and cocaine, and he faced up to 50 years in prison. 50 years is not a scare tactic. That is life. That is the kind of number that makes people start thinking like ghosts. And right around this time, another angle gets thrown into the story, and it changes the mood even more. At this point, there is a darker angle. The theme is that the illegal drug business wouldn't be possible without the American government. It throws around language like treason against the American people and Central Intelligence. It includes a claim that meeting with the CIA could get an indictment dismissed in federal court. It claims the US government cut deals and gave favors to dictators, generals, and gangsters globally. It also includes the line, drugs were in the black community. Nobody really cared. Then it adds a claim that LSD was part of a secret US government mind control program. One quote-like line says, "I give the CIA total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement of the 1960s. People might buy that angle or reject it, but it adds grit to the mood. After Frank is back in New York on reduced bail, the story includes a sharp incident in April 1973. Frank is still moving like a boss, even with the case hanging over him. A Genovese crime family associate named Ernie Coco Coraluzzo negotiated the sale of 40 kilograms of heroin to Matthews. The meeting took place at the Waldorf Astoria, New York. The price is $375,000. Matthews delivered the fee through an intermediary the next day, but Coraluzzo did not provide the drugs. Instead, he fled to the Bahamas. The story says Matthews and his associates then kidnapped James Big Jimmy Capotorto, described as an underling and bodyguard to Coraluzzo. The point was to retrieve the money. After hearing about the kidnapping, Coraluzzo flew back to New York. He returned the $375,000. He also gave Matthews 25 kilograms of heroin on consignment. This moment is messy and tense, and it screams power struggle. Even with federal heat, Frank was still forcing outcomes in the underworld. On July 2, 1973, Frank Matthews was scheduled to appear in a Brooklyn courthouse. He never showed up. One minute the case was moving like normal. The next minute the main target was gone. Authorities held onto a simple story for years. Matthews grabbed his girlfriend Cheryl Brown and fled the country. The street talk in the story adds another piece. He allegedly took about $20 million and dipped. If that is true, then this was not a random run. That was a planned escape. The kind you make when you know the walls are closing in and you're not trying to die in a cell. He left behind his common-law wife Barbara Hinton. He left behind 3 sons. He left behind a Staten Island mansion. Then he vanished. No confirmed sightings, no confirmed contact with friends or relatives. Just silence. That silence is what makes this part feel cold. A kingpin with the whole machine behind him turned into empty air. And once the city realized he was gone, the chase turned into legend fast. The only question was how far that legend could really go before someone finally proved what happened. After Frank Matthews vanished, the government moved like it took the whole thing personal. The FBI put up a $20,000 reward for information leading to his capture. That number was not normal money. It was the highest set by a federal agency since the Bureau offered the same amount for bank robber John Dillinger. That comparison carried weight. Dillinger was a legend in his time, and putting Frank in that same bracket showed how serious the feds were. And even with that cash sitting on his head, the reward stayed unclaimed. That tells you the street code was strong. Either nobody truly knew where he was, or the people who did know were not about to talk. In that world, running your mouth can get you erased, and that silence is where the mystery starts getting colder. The craziest part is how clean the disappearance stayed. Other theories also exploded. One side pushed the clean escape idea. Frank got out. Frank won. Frank is somewhere far, sitting calm. But the other side says the streets do not let you walk away that easy. The underworld angle sits heavy because the motive is right there. Frank had no shortage of enemies. The mafia saw him as a threat. Corsican people resented the competition. Some associates could have been scared he might name names with the hearing coming up. So one theory says Matthews and Cheryl Brown never left New York at all. They could have been quietly murdered, bodies hidden or destroyed, no evidence left behind. Another idea says maybe he did run at first, but the underworld found him anyway and handled what law enforcement could not. And one rumor points straight at a specific crew. A former DEA agent, Frank Panessa, is linked to a claim that the administration received unconfirmed reports about what happened. The rumor says Matthews was lured to the Bahamas by the Genovese family and killed. The reason is simple and cold. First, to keep him from turning state's witness. Second, because of his feud with Ernie Coco Coraluso. That rumor sticks because it fits the logic of that life. When a big case is coming and a man has enough information to burn multiple people, fear spreads. And fear makes people do brutal things to protect themselves. The key word here is unconfirmed, but even as a rumor, it adds weight. Some rumors say Africa, some say the Caribbean, but those rumors have no factual basis. Another theory says Venezuela, and this one shows up with a specific connection. Some believe Matthews escaped to Venezuela to hide out with Spanish Raymond Marquez. Other theories say he might have been captured by other crime families or the Black Mafia, but none of it comes with real evidence. It is all talk. And when facts run out, reputation steps in and starts talking loud. Decades later, Frank Matthews is still a name that rings out. The mythology is still relevant today. He left behind a trail of unsolved murders, a fleet of luxury cars, a lavishly decorated mansion. And for a lot of street dudes, his reputation stayed impeccable. Not because his life was clean, but because in that culture, the biggest flex is getting away. One quote captures how the myth gets told. Frank was freed on $1 million bail, which was required by authorities to be posted collectively by 3 separate bondsmen so that in the event of his jumping, he would have a triple threat on his tail. Then it hits harder with the follow-up. Frank still managed to disappear, taking $20 million with him. That is the legend in one shot. The system built a trap. The trap still did not hold him. And that is why some people treat him like more than a criminal. They treat him like a symbol. One line says he gave the US government the big U and defied them to their face. It also frames him as the original American gangster, saying he bypassed the mob and handled the narcotics all the way down to the street sales while also selling weight to big dealers in other cities. That energy is not polite, it is worship. But while fans were talking, the legal world kept moving. The boss was gone, but the case did not die. The Matthews organization did not disappear just because he did. A later indictment filed January 29, 1975, charged multiple people. The charge is a conspiracy running from September 1968 to January 1975 to import into the United States and distribute large quantities of heroin and cocaine. The list of people tied to convictions in the story includes Barbara Hinton, William Beckwith, James Carter, David Bates, Scarvy McCargo, Charles Cameron, John Darby, and Thelma Darby. A 10-week jury trial. 5 defendants were acquitted. 8 were convicted and sentenced to at least 2 years, with most released pending appeal. And the court text also says 3 co-defendants, including Frank Matthews, were fugitives and still were at the time of that writing. There is also this legal fight around Barbara Hinton and immunity. The government sought an order granting immunity. She later gave about 200 pages of testimony. Then a later indictment raised arguments about whether that immunized testimony tainted the case. That part shows how messy these networks are when they hit court. Even if the kingpin vanishes, the legal machine keeps grinding. And every time it grinds, the mystery gets sharper, because there is no final trial moment where Frank's truth gets locked into the record. A former U.S. Marshal Service member who handled his case thinks he is dead. Ron Chepesiuk is also linked to the idea that Matthews likely died, but what happened may never be known. The story also points to media keeping the question alive. A documentary about Nicky Barnes includes a director talking about how people still debate the bigger kingpin, and he adds that Frank Matthews was legendary too. Another part mentions a newer documentary project investigating the Matthews story and asking the same questions again, including what happened to Cheryl Brown and why the mystery is so hard to solve. Then there is that bold line that sums up how believers talk. Matthews is smarter than the federal authorities, and always has been. That is the kind of line that keeps the legend breathing. It turns a missing man into a winning man, but the truth is still locked behind the same closed door. July 2nd, 1973 came. The courthouse waited, and Frank Matthews never walked through that door. And that is where the trail goes cold. Even now, the same questions stay in the air. Was it a clean escape or a quiet hit? Who helped him move? What happened to Cheryl Brown? And why is the truth still sealed? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.